Good morning.
Good morning.
I have about 40 years, 2 books, and 12 national conferences, and many, many mission trips and camps to share with you in the next 5 minutes. That's the bad news. The good news is, here are my notes. Let me give you 5 years to just kind of remember, to give a little bit of a timeline. 1982, 1993, 2000, 2020, and 2022. Now, can anyone memorize those already? 1982, 40 years ago, my wife Kathy and I were working with teenagers in Young Life, and we took a group backpacking out to Colorado. We were there, and then we noticed and ran into a deaf high school student. And we started thinking, who's doing deaf ministry with teenagers? You know, what's happening in this world and all? So when I went back, I was in seminary at the time, wrote my kind of personal goal is that, you know, I just feel like God is calling me to start something in that direction. It was 18 years later when it happened, so you have to recognize that sometimes God's timing and our timing are a little different when it happens. 1993, we had already adopted 3 of our children, hearing children, as a sibling group, and we had become involved in the deaf world, and we're doing ministry with another deaf couple, and we heard about this young girl in Ecuador, South America, who was, was orphanage where she was living there, who was deaf. And so that's the year that we adopted Anna, our daughter, who's right here now, and who's with us. So we're very excited to see her. She lives in Louisville, Kentucky, and just came down for a visit. So that's really wonderful. So that changed everything. It became very personal because we were parenting a deaf child, not only working with deaf teenagers at that time. 2000, that's when we initiated. When Anna was a teenager, we recognized that she was going to a great church with us, with interpreters, but it was completely missing her understanding, her heart language in terms of what it means to follow Jesus. And so we had a group of 4 or 5 other of her friends that were coming, and we're doing that. And so we started looking all around the country and saw that in Young Life there was only one deaf ministry that was happening, active. And then in YSC, Youth for Christ, and those are the 2 largest youth ministry groups, there was none. And so that's when we started and established Deaf Teen Quest in 2000, which has continued to grow and became part of Youth for Christ National Ministries. And I helped train and raise up a deaf leader who took responsibility for that about 5 years ago so that I could transfer into my next calling, which is really focusing on the liturgical church. A lot of the churches in the Baptist Assemblies of God, Churches of Christ, there's been a revival that's been occurring over the last 20 years because people just started connecting with each other and seeking the Lord. That revival has created a lot of young deaf Christian marriages and raising children and in that next generation. Very well-educated deaf community in that group, and they're taking responsibility and are leading most of the major organizations doing deaf ministry now. Now, I didn't know I was going to lose most of my hearing by the time I'm here, so I encourage everyone to learn sign language. It will happen. But as I moved into my calling in terms of the liturgical church, specifically the Anglican church, which is where it all started. The first ordained deaf man here in our country was in an Anglican church in New York. The first deaf church was an Anglican church. So the deaf can handle liturgy. We just have to help bring that together. So now it leads me to my last year, which is 2022, this year. In 2020, I'm sorry, I skipped that one. So I started with a online signed ASL liturgy that follows the lectionary. So this message that you gave today, I gave a very similar one in sign language, a 30-minute show that I've done every week for 2 years now. When I finish the 3rd year, then I'll have a complete cycle of the lectionary. That'll be in sign language with all the scriptures that we've been using from the Deaf ASL Bible, and as part of that. So the idea is that becomes something that people can use in their homes and in small groups, and then when they're coming to the church, they're going to hear it again through an interpreter. But it will be something that created a new kind of vision of what we're doing. Last thing, and I'm going to try to get this finished up here. In 2015, for my doctoral program, I called together a dozen deaf leaders who are very, very skilled in youth and young adult ministry. And so we spent a lot of time together trying to figure out the challenges and what does church look like in the future. Because it's not working, what we're doing in the deaf church now. It's just, you don't have that multiple generation thing that happens in a hearing church. You have to always be kind of bringing in people, which is great for evangelism, but it's very difficult for sustaining a church. So there's a new vision where you have a large regional ministry that's all connected through this liturgy, okay? And you have it connected and anchored with different churches in that region. So what happens is that people can get the study and follow the liturgy and everything like that, and then a priest can travel around and do the Eucharistic service in sign language and do that process as well. So the first anchor church was Servants of Christ, where I'm on part-time staff. And then this is the second anchor church in terms of making that movement. All Souls in Jacksonville is in that process, and then Incarnation in Tallahassee is the other one in this region. And so the idea is that starting really this fall, I'll be coming to visit quarterly at each of those churches. So from my travel, it'd actually be every once a month for me, but in terms of the different churches, and then we'll be reaching out to try to bring the deaf community here. So that's a really important concept because it's a very small community, very scattered, and one of the least reached people groups in the world. People consistently talk about only 2% of the deaf profess a personal relationship with Christ. And I've been working at this for 40 years now, and I think we've increased that a little bit. So but no one would say more than 5% recognize themselves as Christians. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the point is, so this group is scattered and they're in their homes, but then they come together for a monthly or a quarterly kind of worship and service. So here's my closing. I don't know how close I came to 5 minutes, but I really need your prayer on understanding this and reaching this, and I need your passing the word about it. The different deaf people that you know who maybe are not connected to church at all, that they are aware of this liturgy in ASL that's produced every week that they can follow and they can study. And I always have 3 questions in it for discussion in that group. That if you see that we're starting this process, if you're interested, to get in touch with me, Marcia and Sandra, of course, are very, very important in terms of leading and really supporting this concept as we're trying to reach this very unreached people group in this community. And you have one of the largest deaf populations per capita in the country right in this area. So please pray and please pass the word about this vision, this calling that God is creating now. And we pray for revival in the liturgical churches. Thank you.